world. Libya's former rebels, who now comprise the country's interim government, are trying to regulate the militias, brigades and armed volunteers who set up checkpoints to secure the capital of Tripoli after the ousting of longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi.
In this transitional period, they are very welcome to become members of the police forces until we reach the new government. In that moment, they will have a choice to either to join the army or to join the police forces, or to resign.
NATO said yesterday the current location of ousted leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi remains unknown. NATO Colonel Roland Lavoie added that targeting Gaddafi wasn't the organization's main purpose.
Several key leaders of the regime has fled the country. Very senior commanders and decision makers. So very clearly there was an exodus to some extent. Having said that, thinking about Gaddafi specifically, to be frank, we don't know if he has left the country. He has not made public appearances in the country now for a while, and this certainly raised questions about his whereabouts. But we don't have any sure information about where he is at this time.
Today, a senior U.S. State Department official met Libya's new interim leader, Mustafa Abdel-Jalil, in Tripoli. The visit by U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, was the first by an official from the Obama administration since the capital fell last month.
Meanwhile, Amnesty International is accusing both forces loyal to Gaddafi and the Libyan rebels of committing war crimes. Amnesty warns Libya risks descending into a bloody cycle of attacks and reprisals unless order can be established. Claudio Cordone is Amnesty's Senior Director for Research and Regional Programs.
This report covers roughly the last 6 months, basically the battle for Libya. And we looked at abuses from the side of the Gaddafi forces, many war crimes, possibly crimes against humanity, but also there have been abuses on the part of the fighters who opposed Gaddafi. And that have included, especially in initial days, people that have been lynched, whether Gaddafi soldiers, and also in the following weeks, people suspected of having been part of the Gaddafi security forces, so-called mercenaries. Many black Africans are being automatically assumed to be mercenaries, and others. And we are concerned now about the situation in the prison and in the detention centers.
In response to Amnesty International's report, Libya's new rulers promised to investigate allegations of serious abuses. Well, to find out more about the situation in Libya, we're going to Cairo to speak with Democracy Now! Correspondent Anjali Kamat, who's just returned from 10 days in Libya. Anjali, it's great to see you. Talk about this trip that you have just taken across Libya.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Nermeen. And hi to all the viewers of Democracy Now! I spent 10 days in Libya, traveling from east to west, spent time in the 3 major cities of Libya, Benghazi, Misrata, and the capital city of Tripoli, which fell from Gaddafi's control just a few weeks ago. The mood across Libya, particularly in Tripoli, is absolutely, like, there's just a feeling of euphoria everywhere. People are incredibly relieved to finally be rid of the man who ruled their lives, minute details of their lives, for 42 years. Even though Gaddafi's whereabouts remain unknown and his son's whereabouts remain unknown, in a sense, for most people we spoke to in Libya, it seemed like he'd already passed into the dustbin of history, and this was a phrase that people used over and over again. People are incredibly excited about starting afresh. There's a real sense of rebirth, a feeling that their lives are starting anew. We spoke to several former political prisoners who talked about how for the first time they could taste real freedom now in Libya. You know, having said all of this, despite the incredible euphoria in the streets of all over the main cities in Libya, and particularly in Tripoli, where a city that had been pretty much under serious lockdown for the past 6 months, There are several challenges ahead. One of the major challenges, and this is something you alluded to in the headline, is the proliferation of weapons. The amount of weapons in the hands of civilians across Libya is just mind-boggling. And the biggest challenge facing the new leadership of Libya, the National Transitional Council, is how to rein in these weapons and what to do with the proliferation of the rebel units, the armed brigades that have formed all over the country that help defend cities and towns across the country. So one option would be to integrate them into a new Libyan army. Another option would be to bring them into the police force. But this is a question that remains to be answered, and many are concerned about this proliferation of weapons. Another issue that will be a challenge in the coming days, and this goes back to the Amnesty report you just cited, is the question of national reconciliation. And this is a question facing all Libyans, really. How will Libyans, ordinary Libyans who might have supported Gaddafi in the past, even if they themselves weren't guilty of committing any crimes, how will they be integrated into the new society? And this issue is particularly hard for people who are black Libyans, for darker-skinned Libyans, who tend, for a variety of reasons, have been scapegoated as being supporters of Gaddafi. Part of the one reason for this is the use of mercenaries from sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of black Libyans have been mistaken for mercenaries and arrested, and in some cases lynched and very badly treated. This is something the Council has repeatedly tried to warn against. Another population that's faced the brunt of this aren't Libyans, but are migrant workers from sub-Saharan Africa, living and working in Libya. And some black Libyans we spoke to who had grown up, spent their entire lives in Libya, were very upset by this and concerned about what measures will be taken to stem these sort of racist attitudes. The other main challenge in the days ahead is how the NTC will secure its political legitimacy. For the past 6 months, the NTC has won the wide support of most factions who participated in this uprising. But in the coming days, I think the main challenge is going to be how the NTC will strike a balance between former Gaddafi officials, what they're going to do with, purging former Gaddafi officials versus not going too far and purging them and risk falling into an Iraq 2003 scenario where you create the situation for pockets of resistance among Gaddafi loyalists. This is something that's a very tricky situation right now. A lot of people on the ground are very critical that the NTC has figures from the former regime, even those who switch sides at the very last minute, many of whom have blood on their hands. They want to see these people tried and tried in a court of law inside Libya and their crimes to be made public. They don't want to see them in control of the new Libya. On the other hand, there was this leaked UN draft document that was leaked a few weeks ago that basically outlines how not falling into an Iraq-like situation is very much on the minds of the NTC in Libya. And they don't want to go along the lines of the de-Baathification program that was undertaken in Iraq in 2003. But even as the NTC tries to juggle this, all of their efforts are met with strong responses from ordinary Libyans. And no one is going to take their decisions very lightly. People are very much ready to hold the new leadership accountable every step of the way. Just to give one example, Mahmoud Jibril, one of the leaders of the NTC, appointed a figure known as Barani Ishkal, who was one of Gaddafi's henchmen, to be in charge of Tripoli's security right after Tripoli fell to the rebels. And soon after, this was met with an enormous amount of resistance, and there were major protests in the city of Misrata by fighters and civilians who felt that Barani Ishkal was someone who'd committed many crimes and shouldn't be given a position of power. So there's a real process of contestation that's going on between the NTCs as it tries to strike a balance between different forces and what ordinary Libyans are willing to take. One more point I want to make, which might be interesting to listeners and viewers in the US, is that very few Libyans I met seemed concerned about NATO hijacking the revolution. The major concern for most people is that they're worried that former Gaddafi figures who are still affiliated with the NTC or working around the NTC might try and halt the process of the revolution and the transition to a real democracy. We spoke to a lot of prisoners who had been jailed under Gaddafi, who are now released, and they were very clear that they're going to remain fiercely independent, not allied with the NTC, so that they can monitor the NTC when they commit human rights violations. And so they can hold the NTC accountable. And if the NTC strikes any deals with NATO that will be unpopular, they can hold them accountable to that and protest that. Nobody wants foreign troops on the ground. No one wants bases. And no one wants private military contractors either. Particularly a lot of fighters we spoke to were very much against the idea of private military contractors or foreign troops coming in. But overall, there's an incredible sense of relief. And even though the fight continues in places like Beni Walid and Sirte and Sabha in the central part of the country, and in the major cities, people feel like they can finally speak freely, and they're going to use this newfound freedom to the full extent and not stop at just criticizing Gaddafi. They are committed to also criticizing the new leadership.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Anjali Kamat is joining us from Cairo. She's just back from 10 days going across Libya. Anjali Kamat, Democracy Now! Correspondent, will also be joined by Columbia University professor Mahmoud Mamdani. He's just back from Africa. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.